welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you being here because, as you can see, I understand that it's 9:30 in the morning, and that's hard for a lot of people, myself included. So thank you so much from the both of us for being here today. And today we're going to be talking about building an inclusive tech lab, how we did it, and why you should also do it, and tips, tricks, and things that we've learned. But before we dive into that, let's tell you a little bit about who we are. So hello, I'm Tara. I'm currently a Mixer program manager and also the head of accessibility for Mixer. But along with Brandon, I am one of the gaming and disability community leads at Microsoft. I'm also the co-director of the Game Accessibility Conference that happens the Monday before GDC, so it just happened. And we're looking to expand. We're trying to get one in Paris later this year. We decided that yesterday, less than 24 hours after I'd done my other conference. They were like, but what if you did another in Europe? And I was like, you guys are the worst. Please just let me calm down. But my background before that was in AAA game development. I've been in the industry for 10 years as of St. Patrick's Day. But enough about me. What about you, Brandon?
Well, my name is Brannon Zahand, and I'm actually a release manager at 343 Industries, working on all things Halo. But I'm also a gaming and disability community lead at Microsoft. I've been in the games industry about 15 years, but I've been working with the disability community about 20. I have a background in studying American Sign Language. So with that being said, what are we going to talk about today? Well, first, we're going to tell you how our lab even came into existence. We're going to give you a virtual tour of the lab. Then we're going to talk about the things that we kind of learned along the way as we were making that lab, and then things you can do to make your own inclusive tech lab. So, and Tara, I'm actually going to ask to switch with you because the glare on the screen is making reading some of these notes hard. So, Gaming for Everyone started in 2015 at Microsoft. This movement, this affirmation of the fact that we wanted to make gaming fun for everyone, regardless of race, ability, gender identification. And the point behind Gaming for Everyone was really to build relationships. We wanted to build relationships with our customers. We wanted to build relationships with our colleagues internally at Microsoft and our partners to figure out how we can better understand what it means to make safe, inclusive game experiences. Gaming for Everyone is about taking ourselves out of our comfort zone. It's about looking at our products and our services through a whole new set of lenses. And it was in that spirit which we created the Inclusive Tech Lab. Now, it's easy to forget that between 10 to 15% of the world's population live with some form of disability. And that's staggering. And those disabilities vary greatly in terms of how they impact people's day-to-day lives, including how they game. So first and foremost, our goal was to bring awareness to disability, how it can be a barrier to gameplay, and how being excluded from gaming can have a significant impact on an individual's life. Now, once people understand what it means to be be a part of that gaming and disability community, to understand why gaming and accessibility is important, we then have to educate them on how to design inclusively for that community. To that end, we realized after many discussions, we needed a space. We needed a space dedicated to learning, a space dedicated to developers and community advocates that could come together and ideate on ways to make Xbox a place for everyone. A space to share best practices and missteps, as well as think creatively on how we can make games not just accessible, but enjoyable for as many people as possible. A space that developers would leave energized, educated, and ready to go back to their teams to share their knowledge, the things they had learned, and inspire them to do great things. Now, unfortunately, being crammed in a tiny conference room is not really conducive to education and energizing. Those tend to be more draining and disheartening.
No, I totally love all of the meetings where we all are sitting at a table around computers, totally engaged with one another. What are you talking about?
I know, right? We we wanted to try something a little different than that. So what we decided was we were going to create a space that was comfortable. It was going to facilitate creativity and community. And we wanted the room itself, the space itself, to exemplify inclusive design. Now, we realized that by building out such a dedicated lab, we could not only ensure that we met all that criteria of education, empathy building, but we could also use it as an embassy for the gaming and disability community, a place where they could come in and feel at ease sharing their open and honest feedback with us. And hopefully, by building out such a dedicated space, we could demonstrate to the world that we were serious about being a leader in inclusive gaming, with the hopes that others would see that commitment and choose to join us. So with that being said, let's show them the lab.
All right, so when we give a tour of the Inclusive Tech Lab, we actually kind of have it divided into 4 quadrants. And when we go to give us a tour, we actually break it up into the 4 quadrants. So I just have pictures of the 4 quadrants to go with you through today. So we're going to start with our inspiration wall, which is the first thing you see when you walk in on the left. So we've actually had a version of this inspiration wall since the very beginning, before the lab was actually a lab. But I'll get into that a little bit later. So for us, it's really important to have a constant reminder of what we're doing and who we're doing it for. So Special Effect is a charity in the UK, and they work with a lot of gamers with disability in building custom controllers and custom solutions for them. And as you can see here, these are all pictures of people that they've actually helped. And later, if you want to come talk to me, I can share the Twitter so you can get more in-depth, closer visuals of what's happening here. But they're doing a lot of work. They're cracking controllers. They're wiring things in real weird ways. It's pretty amazing. But what's really important is there's a huge variety here. So for us being able to see the solutions they are coming up with lets us see the challenges that they're going through. And then when we can see that challenge, we can try to think of new ways to make it easier for these guys. Because all they want to do is game, and we want to help them game. So an example kind of this, what problems are they facing, how do we come up with a solution, is I mentioned a lot of them are wiring multiple controllers together. So what if we made that easier? Boom, Copilot. So Copilot is a way on Xbox where you can take 2 controller inputs and have them shared as 1 input. So for these guys, rather than having to wire 2 controllers together to operate maybe one with the left arm and one with the right foot, they could use Copilot and have the system do essentially the heavy lifting of wiring together. Now they don't have to break their controller or wire them or void the warranty. So this was just a kind of example of how we can see their challenges and figure out how to make it easier for them. Directly across from the inspiration wall is our demo space. So we actually have 4 demos. We have spaces for 4 demos. We have 3 set up right now. And for us, we know a lot of developers, almost all developers, are problem solvers. And once they understand what the problem is and they understand the challenge, they will come up with solutions. So with these demo spaces, we have an opportunity to show everyone who comes in what we're talking about. And it can be so much more impactful than just trying to describe the problem. So these are 3 of the demos that we actually have right now. And I say right now because we do switch them up and change them from time to time. But I'm going to tell you about the ones we have right now. So on the left is the Quad Stick. It's a 3D printed puff and sip Kickstarter-backed controller. And it's fully operated with your mouth. So a lot of the times we have to introduce people to the fact that some people aren't using the standard controller. And some controllers that these gamers are using are very different from what we picture as a controller. So we have that there so people can see, you need to break your notion of what a controller looks like or feels like. So in the middle, that's a picture of our eyes-free setup. So the black part folds down to cover the monitor, and the user is able to experience and understand stuff like how someone may be using the narrator to navigate on the Xbox. And then on the far right, that's actually our Rocket League demo with a custom controller setup. And I'll go into a little bit more detail later about how exactly that works. But it's another way to show people how to play a game with inputs that they're probably not used to. And all of these stations give the lab guests a different way to experience games and think about how other people may engage with the game. So the third area is really our meeting space. And like we said earlier, we wanted to make it a warm and welcoming space because we don't want people to come in here and get bored. So it has plenty of chairs. That's actually a Surface touchscreen, which by the way has like a glitter pen that you can draw with. Not that I ever derail meetings to use the glitter pen. But it also has a microphone. It has a camera set up for remote meetings so we can connect with our teams in different locations. And by hosting meetings in the space, we're literally able to put the attendees in a position where they are completely surrounded by accessibility and accessibility thoughts. Something else that's actually pretty cool is our third-party hardware test lab is off this room. So when we're hosting meetings with these third-party teams, we actually do it in here. And so they get to see that we're dedicated to accessibility. And we really hope that it makes them think about what they're building in new ways and maybe new uses for them because we're putting them in the space to talk about their hardware. And we also use the space for what's called inclusive design sprints, which I'm really excited about. We basically will host a team and subject matter experts about whatever we're talking about and developers from those teams and let them learn from each other. And it's very inspiring for our developers because they get to see what people are doing to engage with our product, how they're engaging with our product, and get to hear directly from the consumer the problems they're currently experiencing. We actually just did one for Mixer last January, and I was incredibly proud of the team.
All right. So Tara was kind enough to let me do this slide because this is one of my favorite parts of the lab, and that is the living room experience. When I came to 343, it kind of hit me. I was sitting in front of a computer working on game development, and I was 18 inches away from that monitor. But let's think about it. How many console gamers are actually playing 18 inches away from their monitors? Not many, right? I mean, the majority of console gamers are sitting in their living rooms or their bedrooms or their caves. Most of us are 6 to 10 feet away. Actually, at my house, I'm 11 feet away from my TV. And we're using stereo speakers. We're using surround sound receivers. We're not using headphones. And so, obviously, when you're sitting farther away from the screen, it's going to be harder to see detail, to read text. But beyond that, there's other environmental factors that can more easily impact a living room setup. Glare from lighting, similar to what I just experienced earlier. Background noise, viewing angle, acoustic properties of the room. All of those things can make it more difficult to see or hear what's going on in a game for everyone, not just somebody with a disability. So what we did here was, with the lab, when we set it up, we wanted to be able to try out all sorts of room configurations. We use adjustable lighting and furniture that can be easily rearranged. That way we're able to ideate on ways to better deal with some of these typical environmental issues. We also use the space to test out the latest and greatest audio visual technologies. Because those latest and greatest technologies often offer us some additional capabilities to explore as it relates to using them for accessibility. So in the picture here, what you're looking at is a 4K 75-inch OLED TV. It's hooked up to a Dolby Atmos 5.1.4 surround sound system. And not only do games and movies sound and look amazing on this system, but we've been able to discover that there's some things we can take advantage of with those technologies that can make gaming much more inclusive. As an example, with Dolby Atmos, the ability to render audio objects in 3D as they relate to the specific environment in which you're sitting in can produce a level of fidelity, audio fidelity, that can make audio navigation systems, audio cue systems for those who are visually impaired or blind incredibly accurate and helpful when dealing with various different types of gaming situations. And speaking of latest and greatest, AR, VR, MR, they're all incredibly exciting new technologies that gaming is taking a part in. But strategies and best practices for designing these, there aren't a lot of them out there. Ian Hamilton, who's a well-known game accessibility expert, has written an article that covers some of this stuff, but there's still a lot of exploration going on in this space. So we dedicated a section of the lab just to VR and to future technologies. Now, the thing that's really important to call out here is that that we have lots of products that aren't made by Microsoft. Of course, we have HoloLens, we have some of the AR devices we partnered on, but we also have an Oculus Rift, we have a PS4 VR. And the reason for that is we don't pretend to know, or to say, we don't pretend that we know all the best ways to tackle all these inclusive design challenges with these new technologies. It's important for us to see how our partners and our competitors are tackling those issues. We want to understand what the gaming and disability community believes to be the best practices, regardless of the platform.
So how did we get here? This is obviously something that didn't happen overnight. We didn't just wake up and have an inclusive tech lab, although that would have been awesome. And I'm sure Evelyn and Bryce over here would have been super excited to just wake up and it existed rather than all the hard work and legwork they had to do to make it happen. But it's actually a really interesting story on how we went from nothing to a dedicated inclusive tech lab. So this was not a straight line or a clear-cut process. It had a lot of growth, learning, exploration, and it definitely evolved over time. Like, there wasn't a roadmap. Like, it was, the whole way, like, okay, well, this seems like a good idea, or this seems like a good idea, and learning. So for us, it really started with inspiration from a popular charity for gamers with disabilities. So Able Gamers has something called an expansion pack. Able Gamers teamed up with Humble Bundle, SteelSeries, Electronics Arts, Jinx, and Corsair components and created packs that would be donated and installed as permanent fixtures for places like group homes, special needs, daycare facilities, and long-term living centers. And these packs were intended for facilities with multiple special needs patients, and these donation bundles included assistive technology, specialty controllers, and of course, great video games. And the first expansion pack was installed in a pediatric specialty care unit in Hopewell, Pennsylvania, and it had great success. So they had quad sticks, they had adroit controllers, which is a controller where you kind of do all the remapping on the hardware, switches, and so much more. And this really inspired us and was like, how do we kind of take their expansion pack idea and make a space where we can teach developers using it? So for us, our first stab at the lab was actually what we now refer to as an arcade. So funny enough, although I wasn't a Microsoft employee at the time, I was actually there for the first arcade. So every year, Microsoft has the Ability Summit, which is all about accessibility. And so this year, in 2016, that was the first year that game accessibility was introduced into the speaking lineup, which is actually why I was there. So for the arcade, we had a range of specialty controllers, simulators, and information. Going through the pictures here, we had a setup made by Warfighter Engage. So they're a charity that helps veterans with disabilities by creating custom controllers. We had, let's see, Brannon wearing motion restricting gloves. We had Bryce demonstrating the quad stick. He's actually playing Forza, although you can't see it in that picture, and some vision reducing goggles. And this is just part of what we had today. There is actually so much more we had there, including other stations for like low vision simulation. And one thing that's not pictured here was actually the first version of the inspiration wall, where we had all of the pictures of special effects. So that, for us, has been there since day one. Yeah. And after the Ability Summit, the team took the setup and kind of did pop-up versions of it in, it's called the Commons. It's like where there's like studios, ABCD, that have a lot of Xbox people, and then in the middle, there's like essentially like a mini mall full of restaurants. And they were just doing pop-up versions of it there. So while people were going through, they would see it. So it's a high traffic area, special at lunch, and at other opportunities. But it was clear that this little pop-up station wasn't enough. Like, it wasn't permanent. It wasn't as strong as it could be. And then, like, we got lucky. What really came next was the opportunity. We were craving a permanent home, and we just needed a space. But where would we get space? Where would it go? Lucky for the team, there was actually like a workout area that was kind of being underutilized, and people were thinking of getting rid of it anyway or moving it, and that was our time. We're like, ooh, wait. We would like a space. And because we'd had the arcade and we'd been carting it around the whole time, we'd basically been working to legitimize the idea and the work we were doing. And we're like, oh, but wouldn't it be great if that thing we keep doing had a home? And it showed why it was important and why we deserve to have the space. But beyond the fact that there was a space that was opening up, part of it was being in the right place at the right time. Not only has accessibility been on the rise in the game industry for the past few years, with a dramatic increase in both features and awareness, there was also a culture shift happening within Microsoft. So in 2014, Satya Nadella became CEO for Microsoft, and after that, Microsoft revised its mission statement to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. But for Satya, accessibility is very personal. His first son has severe cerebral palsy. So I'm just to quote him on Microsoft's accessibility work. Our work in accessibility has an incredibly deep meaning to me personally. Our family's experience has required me to continually hit refresh on my emotions and on my outlook, and it is in this constant quest for renewal that I realize, despite the fact we are making progress, we still have much to do quickly for so many. And so the fact that that was how Microsoft was starting to think about accessibility, and we were showing up and being like, hey, we'd like a home, like, we got really, really lucky. So kind of what we were doing was fitting in line with Satya's goals, empowering everyone, and it also was right in line with the Gaming for Everyone commitment. But it does take more than just being in line with your company's ideas and messagings, right? So for us, we needed to get executive sponsorship, someone at the leadership level wanting to back us. And we were actually really lucky in that we got that. So really for the lab, something like that needs grassroots efforts, and it needs people who care to do the legwork, but having support from the top down is also incredibly important. So for us, getting the executive sponsorship was about 3 things. So first, showing the need. And this is how you guys can get executive sponsorship, by the way. So showing the need. People were learning from the arcades, but the arcades weren't always around, and we didn't have a space to learn or explore because it was temporary. And we needed to show that there was a goal, there was a craving for learning, and we wanted to innovate, and the space would help us do that. But it's also really important to know how to measure success. And success in an inclusive tech lab could be so many things. Maybe it's the amount of people who visited the lab, or the amount of inclusive design features that shipped, or the number of developers who now know one more thing than before. And we kind of had to learn, what is success for the lab?
Yeah. So, yeah, learning. This whole experience has been about learning, and it's been, putting together the lab was an incredible journey, and the learning all along the way, constantly. Looking back, some of those learnings, they seem pretty obvious now. Not so much, but we want to share with you guys some of those learnings so that you have a head start if you decide to make your own dedicated inclusive technology lab. All right, so this is the audience participation portion of the presentation. So first off, how many of you guys have seen those pregnancy simulators? The ones with the big bellies that you strap on, right? All right. Now, quick question. Can anyone in the room who has had a baby and thinks that those simulators fully and accurately represent being pregnant, can you guys just raise your hand, you gals? Anyone? No? No, not one? No. Didn't think so. Yeah, you see, so if they don't, why do we have them, right? Well, they give us a lens by which we can try to better understand, some of the challenges of pregnancy. But look, it's not the same as being pregnant, right? And the same goes for accessibility simulators. We have goggles in the lab to simulate visual impairment. We have earplugs to simulate audio impairment. Gloves you saw earlier that simulate fine motor impairment. All those things can give us a better sense of ways we might be able to tackle certain challenges, but they will never accurately reflect what it's like to have one of those impairments. So while we may use them to think creatively about product design, it's important to know that we never use them to validate designs. Validation needs to be handled by those who understand accessibility challenges firsthand. I can't stress this enough. We do not and never will role-play disabilities in our inclusive tech lab to validate products. Now, that wasn't something we necessarily learned when we were building the lab, but what we did need to learn was how to relay that message to individuals who were coming into the space. That's why we always curate our lab tours and why we have signage, like this signage you see above, that clearly explains this very important principle.
So we've obviously just told you that having simulators wasn't enough. So we really did want to show authentic rigs. So we had the pictures of everything that was happening with special effect, and our first thought was just like, let's take that and put this here and then let people see it. And our first Rocket League setup was so much more complex than the one we have now. We were really trying to replicate what we were seeing on the wall. And we found out it was way too much for people. It was way too different. So if you haven't been using that stuff and then you go to use it, it was incredibly intimidating, and people were basically in like shock, and what we were trying to say wasn't getting through because they were so focused on this crazy thing they hadn't seen before. So we really needed to back it up and make it more approachable. So we basically learned less is more. And this was the end result. So this is our current Rocket League station. So in this setup, gas is the foot pedal that you can see on the floor. The player steers left and right using, they're the two blue and green buttons about knee height. And there's the joystick on the arm, and that's used for jumping. And that's it. And this Rocket League is an easy game with simple controls, and using a pedal for gas is already really natural for most people. So this demo station was much easier for people to use and experience than what we had set up previously. So you just have to show people the change. You don't have to go for the huge crazy rigs. Like just a little bit to kind of challenge what people are used to is totally enough. And something else that we learned while building these crazy rigs is although people find a lot of this stuff cool to look at, we actually didn't need to invest the money in it. So on the left is the Adroit controller, and it's made by Evil Controllers in partnership with Able Gamers. I mentioned it previously. So that controller is $399. A 500 gig Xbox One S is $280. So that controller to play games on Xbox is literally more expensive than the Xbox itself. And I'm not saying, to be clear, I'm not saying this is not a good product. And for some players, particularly on PC, this is very, very important. We just found other things that we could use instead. And this was, to call it out, this was really the first controller of its kind that did hardware remapping like that. So that was great, and the craftsmanship was great, but we just didn't need it. We also have the quad stick, the puff and sip controller, and that also costs $399, although there are other ones specifically made for first-person shooters that cost more than this one. And that piece of technology also works fine, no problems with it. But it's not something we have people demo. It's mostly there for show. Like, we're not gonna have person after person put their mouth on this thing in the lab. We could have had a picture, right? Like, I mean, germs, they're real. And then finally, we also have the X keys. Now, don't get me wrong, this box actually does a lot of stuff. And if you're gonna buy one of these items, buy that one. It's also the cheapest at $125. We just found that we haven't really been using it in the lab. So like these are 3 things that are expensive that we purchased that we're not doing much with. We could have just done it with this. So what we do use in the lab all the time is our modified Mayflash arcade stick. Ours has been modified to have additional ports on the bottom. The joystick itself is like $80. We paid more than that for ours because we had someone modify it for us. But lucky for you, while One Switch was making ours, he actually created a walkthrough on how you could just buy a Mayflash stick and edit it yourself. So that's the short link at the bottom. So if you want to do it and go DIY, that's his walkthrough. So our arcade stick is actually what powers our Rocket League demo. We have all the switches just plugged into that controller.
So switching gears a little bit, one of the reasons that accessibility experts have a love-hate relationship with regulations, well, I'm just going to show you why. So I told you we wanted to build an inclusive, accessible space, right? We wanted to make sure that our lab was entirely ADA compliant. And that included not just our demo stations, not just our tech, but like things like the door. We wanted to make sure the door was ADA compliant. So when we looked at the ADA regulations, we said, 32 inches, fantastic. We're gonna make our door 32 inches wide. So we did. And immediately after we started inviting community members in, we realized we had made a huge mistake. You see, the problem is that 32 inches, while being technically compliant, it's not wide enough for certain scenarios. For example, someone in a large power chair could still have difficulty navigating through the door, or maybe someone in a smaller chair with a service dog, or someone who was blind and being assisted by another individual. So we redid the door. It's now 47 inches wide. This is the after picture. So you can see it's 47 inches wide, and then we added a separate section that's about 2 feet wide that we can open as needed. Now this is the crazy part. As costs go, the single one-time largest cost for us for the lab was that door. So it just goes to show that A, think about this stuff early on in your designing, and B, a compliant experience is not necessarily a good experience. Now, not only did we want a good experience, we wanted a fantastic experience, right? And we wanted to pay a lot of attention to details to ensure that we had a truly inclusive space. So we thought about things like furniture. You know, we knew we'd have to rearrange furniture for demos when we brought in users in power chairs. So we picked a couch and chairs and tables that were light and easy to move around. But that being said, we also made sure that every piece of furniture was sturdy and stable so that you could use it for support if you had problems standing or walking. For wheelchair users, all of our demo desks have adjustable height and they have no obstacles underneath, so people can roll right up to the stations. Now you'll notice that all of our chairs and couches are in bright colors. Now that wasn't just because we were trying to make it look pretty. The fact is that those different colors contrasting against the dark floor can make it easier for somebody with visual impairments to find a place to sit. In addition, other things we thought about when it came to visual impairment, our information sheets in the lab are printed in Braille as well. We have a soda fridge, and in that soda fridge, there's dividers that have all the cans lined up, and the label for each type of soda is in Braille as well. We even thought about putting in things like stands for people to place their canes while they were sitting and playing games. Now, for those with sensory processing considerations, we put in adjustable lighting. Color, temperature, brightness, it can all be adjusted to best suit individual visitors. Those lights are all connected to an automation system that can be controlled with voice so that users who have troubles operating switches can control those more easily. Now, all of this being said, we learned a lot. We still have a ton more to learn. That's why we're regularly bringing the community into our lab. We've brought in groups from a variety of NGOs, such as Cerebral Palsy Foundation, Seattle Children's Hospital, and they've helped us not only ideate on ways we can make gaming better for everyone, but how the lab can be a more inclusive and more welcoming and more effective space for promoting our message of inclusive game design. It's not an exaggeration to say that every single time we've brought in the community into the lab, we've learned something new about inclusive gaming and our inclusive tech lab. We're also still learning that there have been some unexpected benefits that we didn't think we would get from the lab. So for example, we never intended to use the lab for recruiting, but somehow word got out and recruiters heard about it, and we started getting these requests to bring potential recruits through the lab. And we were kind of surprised, asked why. Well, it turns out that there are a lot of people who are really inspired by Microsoft's new mission of empowering every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. Especially millennials seem to be really intrigued by that mission. And our lab is a tangible representation of that commitment. Another cool factor that we weren't kind of expecting was the fact that the lab would afford us opportunities to get our message out via channels we might not otherwise get access to. So for example, we've had opportunities to partner with organizations like GameStop to highlight the space and bring broad awareness to the need for gaming and accessibility. This screenshot was a video that was put together for GameStop TV. It features Bryce and Evelyn, who were the masterminds behind our lab. And this has been featured in over 7,000 retail stores. So wow, what an amazing way to get our word out that we never thought we would have.
So now that you've seen our lab and how it came to be and what we learned in the process, I know all of you are like, oh my God, I'm ready to go make my own lab right now. All right, well, we got you. So that being said, we know not every budget is created equal. And so we kind of have tips and tricks on how you can replicate what we've done based on the different resources you may have available. So we're going to kind of talk about small or non-existent, medium and large budgets today.
So look, if you don't have the budget for a dedicated space or you're just in a really small space, you can do what we initially did and put together accessibility arcades. You know, as mentioned, they're temporary pop-ups of assistive tech and educational materials that can be used to educate folks on the basic concepts of gaming and disability. Now, again, they aren't ideal as you won't get all the benefits of the lab, especially that notion of having an embassy to bring the gaming and disability community into to introduce to your development teams. But they can be a good place to start if you can't secure a permanent location for your lab.
So you're going the arcade route. Again, I want to reiterate what he just said. Don't worry if you can't make a full lab. Having just an arcade can be fine. And don't worry, I have been there. So before I was with Microsoft, I was working with Gaikai, which is the cloud services division of PlayStation. And I made an arcade with practically no money and just wrangling up literally whatever I could find at home or in the office. So let's talk about ways you can do that and be successful. So when I worked at Gaikai, I didn't have a budget, but I had people who were interested in accessibility and a special occasion, Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And I made this little mini lab based on what I could find in the office. So what did I do? So we had PS4s, we're part of PlayStation, so that was pretty simple, and a copy of Uncharted, a hugely popular game. So Uncharted has a whole accessibility menu with tons of assistive features. And I had a pair of the vision simulating goggles, which by the way, you can totally make on your own. There are tutorials where you can basically take some welding goggles and some like saran wrap and make them yourselves for cheaper if you don't have the money to buy them. So I had a stand that literally had Uncharted and its assistive features and some goggles to try to get people going. I also just reached out to some other people. So I mentioned Warfighter Engaged earlier. I just emailed them and I'm like, hey, I'm doing this event. Do you have anything I can show off? And they're like, yeah, sure. And they sent me controllers. I also had another like specialty game rig set up from another charity called Game Changer, which helps children game during long-term hospital stays. I also got a guest speaker. So there was a Twitch streamer named Handy who has no arms or legs but plays first-person shooters, and he was local. And I was like, hey, I would love for you, while I'm setting this up, just come and talk. Like, just tell your story. Again, that was free. When he came, like, I was like, I can't pay you, but here's like all the swag I can find in the office to give out. Like, and that worked. We also set up a colorblind station with 2 iPads. So in that picture is Ezra. He's one of our programmers who is actually colorblind. And he ran into problems all the time because even our internal tools didn't always have a colorblind mode. So we took my iPad and then my husband's iPad. On the bottom one, we had some puzzle game going. And on the top one, we had a colorblind filter. And so we were basically telling people to play the game looking through the top one. And they'd be like, well, I can't play it. And I'm like, right, that's Ezra's life all the time. Now you get it. So we also had 2 laptops that were running. And basically what we did was we were having people race to try to get on the company Wi-Fi using the screen reader. Like, that was it. It was actually a really popular station because most game devs are gamers and therefore competitive. So people wanted to win. And then I had all of the informational materials I could find. Anything that was out there, I just printed it up and I left it on a table. And so all of this, it was like $100. And some of it I just got out of my pocket, right? Other than like the free swag I stole from the office. So, you know, we had this great day where I had a lot of people come up to me and tell me how much they learned, and I didn't really spend any money. So it can be done. You have tons of stuff, I am sure, in your office that you can repurpose for just a day.
Absolutely. And you know what? If you don't have something, ask for it. Seriously, like, we didn't have an unlimited budget when we built our lab. And look, chances are you're not going to either. But we were incredibly fortunate that we have these amazing partners that we work with, that do peripherals, that do televisions, that do audio systems. And we just reached out to them and said, look, we're doing this thing, and we've got a finite budget, and it'd really do a lot for us if you could help us out and showcase some of your equipment here. And at the same time, we could use it to help demonstrate accessibility features. And people said yes in droves. And it's really cool because not only do we get the win of having that, being able to put our budget somewhere else, but then those people get to show off their equipment in a really, really cool sort of way. I cannot tell you the number of times people have left the lab going, oh my God, I need to have a Dolby Atmos system at home.
To the demo we do with the Dolby is like amazing.
I know, right? I've been trying to convince my wife, no luck so far. But it's not just donating equipment, it's donating time as well. I mean, as an example, our lab is run by volunteers. We handle scheduling of the space, we prep for events, we manage the tours, we give presentations, we keep all the demos and documents up to date. It is a ton of work, I'm not gonna lie. But there's 5 of us volunteering, so between it, we're able to handle it. And it's also just a great opportunity, to educate people as well. As people volunteer, not all of our volunteers started out being accessibility experts, but they were people who were curious to learn more, and now they've grown their knowledge in their area of expertise by working in the lab. So again, don't be worried if you don't have money for a dedicated lab manager.
But maybe you do have some money. Not all the money, but some money. You need to be smart about where you're going to be spending it then. And to be honest, we really recommend that you spend it on PC and PC accessories, as this is where most of this technology is working best currently. So if you're going to purchase these items, again, don't dive into buying the most expensive, fancy custom stuff. Just get something like the Mayflash, do the DIY updates, and get some simple switches for it. And if you're going to have issues pitching this space as a standalone lab, think of someone you could be a roomie with. It would be totally reasonable to share the space with some user researchers. Sharing is okay, that's fine. And if you're making an accessible space, you could then have play testers with disabilities come in, and you're sharing with user research, so win-win, right? And another good thing to invest in is really a nice set of headphones. If you're not gonna get the Dolby system, you're probably not gonna get that right off the bat, but you wanna make sure that you can replicate stereo sound experiences as well for those who have low vision or are perhaps blind. And finally, find some great examples of media on what you want to teach people about. We're lucky enough that we have multiple demo stations. You may not be, and that's okay. Sometimes finding a video, a pamphlet, any of that, and having it kind of shovel ready to show people is all that you're going to need. All right, well, let's say you just got a whole bunch of money. I don't know where it came from. You're not asking. You've got it. Let's spend it. Okay, so the first 2, we kept debating on which we wanted to have first, whether it should be make this a meeting space or hire staff for the lab. I eventually just gave up debating and left it as is. So invest in making this a meeting space. As I've said previously, being able to bring people in and have them have ideas and a place that they can talk to their people. And like I said, even bringing in people who maybe aren't there to talk to us about accessibility, that we're just oh, well, the only meeting room that was open is our inclusive tech lab. That's awesome, and that's a win. So any money you can dump into getting a camera, a great audio setup for Skype calls or whatever, do that. And then secondly, like I said, the other thing that was really important is if you can hire even a person to run the lab, invest in it. Like I said, so it takes us 5 volunteers to keep the lab running, and we are constantly stretched super thin. So Evelyn has a meeting on Monday. We're okay, these are the events in the lab that's happening. Who can do it today? And we're all just I don't know. And even just managing the calendar for the lab is super hard because we're so popular. But it's almost a problem. We're almost too popular for our volunteers to be able to handle. And I think if you guys make a space, hopefully you'd have the same problem. So literally hiring someone. The other thing is having multiple demo stations is great, especially if you have multiple people going through the lab. You can have people doing different things at the same time, and it really keeps people engaged. And the next one is making conscious decisions about your space. Like, we invested in making our door better. Figuring out like, oh, well, this carpet maybe is really hard for wheelchairs for some reason. Yep. Like spending the money to make the room a better place. And that kind of leads into the idea of like ADA compliance plus. Like we said that, compliant isn't always a good experience. And so if you have the money to go beyond, like invest in it. It means so much to have a space that everyone can truly be in and be comfortable, because that's not always something that happens all the time. The next one, like if you can manage to get the Dolby, like get it. We had a slide earlier when Brandon was presenting of the living room space, and on the couch was a guy named Sightless Combat. He is a blind gamer who was actually playing Killer Instinct in that, and he was able to play in that room because of our awesome sound system. And so you can actually enable a lot of experiences for people with low or no vision by having truly awesome surround sound. So like, yeah, it is super cool, but it's also super useful for the space. Yeah. So invest in it. And then the final thing is, decor. Like, we have a really sexy room. Like, GameStop filmed in there because it looks awesome. We have other media stuff that gets filmed in there, which means more people see it because the space looks great. So if you have that extra money, make it sexy. People want to use it. And I really can't understate how great the lab has been. The inclusive design sprints have taught so many teams so much. And this is actually a picture from Mixers that we did last January. And I was so proud of my team. But what I saw happening with my team is happening with other teams, and it's going to keep happening with more and more teams. And we're building stronger bonds with the community, and has really helped us show that we care as Xbox and Microsoft. We care about this community, and it gives us a place to focus on the feedback that we've been giving. And what we've made and what we have coming that originates from or around this lab, I can't wait to see those ideas go live. And funny enough, we actually have some, when I'm talking about so much has happened, we have some data on that.
Yeah, so for those of you who are a bit more data-oriented like myself, these numbers I think are really helpful in showing the promise of a tech lab. In 5 months, okay, just 5 months, we've had over 3,400 individuals come and visit our lab to learn about inclusive game design and accessibility. Now, 61% of those were visitors from internal at Microsoft, designers, producers, executives. We've even had members from our other core businesses, such as Windows and Office, come by and take a look. Our teams are drawn by that unique experience the lab provides and the opportunity to ask really tough design questions in a safe, comfortable environment. Everyone always comes away better educated about our gaming and disability community, how to engage them, and the best ways to meet their needs. Now, 39% of our visitors, that means, are external to Microsoft. So that's, again, NGOs, advocacy organizations, academics, business partners. Even local school groups have come by to tour the lab and to collaborate on ways we can make our gaming more inclusive. Not just at Microsoft, but across the entire industry. And regardless of whatever we're doing in the lab, whether it's a tour, a video shoot, a design meeting, or even just a party, our goal is always the same. Let's educate, let's build empathy, and grow and support our gaming and disability community. So, with that being said, our one ask, come visit us, okay? Our lab is public, please. Doesn't matter who you work for, doesn't matter if you're within the industry or you're with an advocacy group. We just want you to come, visit the lab, check it out. We'll share best practices. Let's find ways to partner. Let's ensure that gaming for everyone is just that, gaming for everyone, regardless of how you play, where you play, what platform you play on, and what abilities or disabilities you may have. So with that, let's take some questions. We have a Yeah, we have a microphone right here, and since we're being recorded, if you have an opportunity to ask a question, please come up to the mic. Did we really do that good of a job? No one has questions.
I knew we explained everything.
All right. Awesome. Oh, no, we've got one. Yeah.
All right.
Two things, actually. In terms of doing it the cheap way, some other things to look at are artist and actually quilting tools for the grayscale capability. So they're tools that they're basically clear plastic, green-red filters that when you put them on top of something, it causes it to look like color blindness. Wow. It's actually used by artists for grayscale to balance artwork. Digital artists tend to not be aware of it. They tend not to use it. Physical artists do. So that's another thing. You can go to a quilting store. You can go to Joann's. You can go to my favorite place, which I'm not wearing today, is Amazon.com, and pick up those kind of tools.
Fantastic.
The other thing, yeah, so they're $20, something like that. So they're real cheap, and it's real easy to set up in a lab. The other thing you can do is also statically use your phone, take a picture, and then use the grayscale out of the photo app.
Well, I think that's very similar to when I was showing what I did at PlayStation. Like essentially, like I had that app running in real time in an iPad with the other one under it doing the same thing. Because for me, it was really important to like have people try to play the game, right? Rather than just seeing a picture. Like I can show you a picture and be like, which one would you move? But then the experience of watching people actually trying to play when they couldn't see the colors, like it was more impactful than just here's a picture of what this game looks like.
But I mean, you bring up such fantastic points, right? Like the fact of the matter is you don't need to go invest in some $500 colorblind simulator, right? To start educating people. There's really great tips and tricks that you can do. I mean, I never even thought about getting those filters from Joann's. My wife goes there all the time. I'll be attending her next visit, so that's fantastic. I'll look completely clueless, but I'm sure.
a carrier. Both my kids are colorblind. My dad was colorblind, so I've had to live with it my whole life. Wow. The other piece is, can you talk about the curb cut effect? How has this changed the games of the teams that have gone through this and actually resulted in improvements for all players?
Wow.
Because that's really where the payoff is, right? Because
I
was going to say, that's really where the payoff is for the broader audience, because I struggle with convincing my leadership that we need to go do these things until you can prove to them that's like all players benefit.
Well, so I'm going to let you take this, but one of the cool stats that actually came out at the Game Accessibility Conference is everyone has this idea that, accessibility features are only for gamers with disabilities. And it's like, well, for Assassin's Creed Origins, they actually showed the data that was something like 63% of players were playing with subtitles on. I'm not a statistician, but I feel like 63% of the people playing that game were not deaf. I don't know. Feels not right, but that's just showing that there are more people using these features. But yeah, no, we've definitely had ideas and things we have done in the games that we can show.
Well, and Tara can talk about Mixer, but since that's not technically a game, I thought I might talk about it from like my experience working at 343 and with other game studios. So we do these inclusive design sprints, and one of the funny things about game development, unfortunately, especially AAA game development, is usually if you're working on something, it takes a few years to get out the door, right? So I'm not going to be able to talk about any specifics right now in terms of anything you've seen that's shown up yet, because we just put the lab out recently. But what I will say is this: when we bring people into that lab and we start talking about inclusive design, what immediately comes up, almost always, is, oh wow, there's a tiny change here, there's a tweak here that we can make. We already have this thing, if we just tweak it one more degree, we can all of a sudden have this accessible feature. We see tons of that, right? So it's fantastic because I'm seeing game devs who have already thought about features that can have some really inclusive potential, some really accessible potential. They just need like one extra step. They come in, they make those connections, and we see them starting to make those changes. So it's great to help. It's been really valuable in terms of helping people knock out some of those low-hanging fruits of accessibility.
Go ahead.
One additional thing. The lab is shared with our hardware partners.
Yeah.
And we bring hardware partners through the lab all the time. And recently
Evelyn, can I actually ask you, because they're recording this? Can
yeah. Well, no, go to the mic. We're labs. I don't think you want to talk into Brandon's neck.
So one of the things that we had was a hardware partner that came into the lab, and they were pitching a particular accessory. And once they walked them through the tour of the lab, it fundamentally changed how they thought about their product, and it changed the pitch for the product to be inclusive forward. And they went back to their developers and started thinking more about how that really influences the products that they bring to market.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your questions.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank
it. All right, who's next?
Sorry, I had my students bugging me.
Oh, yeah, no, hey, I hear you.
So I'm a teacher actually building a lab.
Oh, wow.
And I was more interested in what sort of findings you've had for your developers, because I have a lot of students that have a lot of these same disabilities, and I was wondering if you'd had any findings from your time bringing teams through for the developers at your studios.
So I think for us, like we don't want to be like, hey, this is how you should develop your games, right? It's presenting the challenges that like, so in your case, like showing people what the students are doing. So, you know, when we were looking at what Special Effect was doing with the crazy controllers, we like, okay, how do we make that easier?
I don't think I said it. So from the other side, for your actual developers that are disabled.
Oh,
okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
I think one of the fascinating things about the game industry right now is that we're thinking a lot now about accessibility in games, and that's fantastic. Like, I mean, I've seen more, the momentum in the last 2 years outdoes anything I've seen in the previous 13 years of my career. But the fact of the matter is that middleware tools, okay, game development tools are lagging behind, actually, right? So even
I've noticed.
yeah, right? So it's absolutely something we talk about when we're talking about game development. And it actually, it's surprising how often it comes up when people say, oh man, you know, I'm building in this engine, and it's just really, really difficult to implement that feature in this engine. Those sorts of conversations are being had. Internally, we also have a lot of our own internal development tools that we use. And as you're starting to go through and run these tools through some of the simulations things we have, and we're showing people how to build, you start to find those problems really quick. So yes, we try to not just talk about inclusive game development in terms of the end product for the customer, but the tools need to be accessible too. The engines need to be accessible too, because we want a larger group of people who identify as disabled, people with disabilities, in the industry making the games. And the only way that's going to happen is if we make sure those tools and those engines are accessible to them.
Yeah, and we also totally understand that, like, it is great that we are making tools to make game development, or games themselves, more accessible, you know, and the stuff that we're putting out on the Xbox. But we also know we're the end of the line. Like, if by the time you've gotten to us, like, if you hit a problem with the engine, you're not making it to us to begin with. So we recognize that it's great we're doing all this stuff, but we need to have conversations and partnerships with people who are before us and earlier in the pipeline to solve those problems, because, you know, if you are having the problem trying to, you know, use a screen reader with Unity, well, you're not going to make a game, so you're never going to use our text-to-speech API because you literally didn't get to us.
Yeah, yeah.
A couple of things I'll mention about that is you specifically asked about developers. We have found that when we brought people that are within Microsoft and go through the lab, it does two things. One, we have some existing game developers who have not self-identified as having a disability, and they've been inspired by the space and gone back to their team and disclosed their disability to the team, because not all disabilities are visible, obviously, and that has further educated their teammates about why it's important to invest in the tools that we use on a daily basis and the methodology that we apply to actually how we do development. The other aspect that Brannon and Tara did talk about was the recruiting aspect. We have found amazing success unintentionally having young developers coming in from all over the world. We've had student groups from all over the world come in, Beijing, we had folks coming in from Norway and Sweden, and young developers were inspired by that and went back to their educators and curriculum creators and recommended that they actually build some more information into their curriculum specific to accessibility.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks,
all right.
Madeline.
Next question.
Hi there, thanks so much for the session.
Oh, no, thanks for coming.
So
Thank you.
basically,
As a reminder, if you love this session, please rate us 5 stars when you fill out your survey.
for sure.
This isn't her first rodeo. Sorry. Go on.
Okay, so basically, I have access to some space in town. So here, the small space. So that means like I fulfill at least like say the first condition of running a lab. But aside from that, it's hidden, it's not in Soma, it's just like average neighborhood. So I'm really interested in knowing the sorts of, any kind of study cases I could take upon to know, could you run a lab in a non-hip neighborhood, much smaller scale, those kind of things.
Yeah, well, we run our lab in probably, I don't know if you consider Microsoft hip or not, but we're in a studio, like in a small area, and one of our in Studio B. But in terms of spaces that are outside of outside of a specific studio, like in neighbors and whatnot, we actually don't have any studies on that. That'd be a fantastic thing to look into. So after this talk, why don't we sync up? I'd love to chat with you more about like what you're thinking about, and there might be some opportunities, and we can certainly try to track down some more information, but to date, this is still a pretty new concept from what we've seen, and I personally am not aware of anything that's been done outside of like a studio or anything like that.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, and it goes for same for any of the audience here. If you guys want to, any persons here want to collaborate, I will be happy to talk.
Fantastic. All right, stick around then. All right, hey, thank you guys so much. We appreciate it, and have a good rest of your conference.
Thanks, guys.